Good afternoon. So I'd like to talk during my talk today, and it's going to be brief. During my talk today is to really talk about two aspects of this work that we call diversity. One, I want to highlight the journey that those of us who've been working in this space for decades and that journey that we've been on. And also, I would like to talk about the intersection of inclusion and belonging. And before I do, I'd like to read a poem. And this poem actually encapsulates this journey from my perspective. Diversity asks, who's in the room? Equity responds, who is trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Inclusion asks, have everyone's ideas been heard? Justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't the majority? Diversity asks, how many more, and you can pick your marginalized group, that we have this year than we had last year? And equity responds, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? And justice challenges, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views? Now, those of us who have been on this journey and starting with diversity and then comes along inclusion and equity and equality and justice and belonging, it's been an evolution over the years. But when we begin to talk about the importance of inclusion and how this happens, there are questions we often ask ourselves, such as the questions that you see here. We may not identify them with diversity or inclusion or equity or justice, but there are questions that are constantly being asked, not only by leaders, but oftentimes by the people who sit in the groups that feel marginalized, that don't feel seen or heard. When I begin to think about the challenges we have with the concept of diversity and bringing it into play, there are words that come up for me. And I've heard individuals say these words: shame. Shame about the fact maybe I haven't recognized things as I should have. Guilt. Guilt for various different reasons. Fatigue. Fatigue from doing this body of work. Fatigue from constantly thinking about it as a leader. Judgment, because I haven't necessarily in my mind done all the right things to solve the issues and the challenges. And oftentimes it leads to isolation. One of the things that Brené Brown says when we think about belonging is shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. When I think about the body of work regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me it takes on something very different. It takes on a thought process of how do we feel as if we belong in the environment in which we work. From my perspective, it is more about feeling welcomed in the environment in which you are a part. Welcomed from a standpoint that I can show up as my authentic self and not be judged. That I'm walking into circumstances and I feel like I belong in the room, and that my voice can actually be seen and heard. And I know some of you are probably wondering, how can a voice be seen? How can you see a voice? But from my perspective, when you hear a voice, you attach it to a person. And are we doing it in a way that individuals are being seen for who they are and being heard for what they're saying? So let me approach this in a different way. I'd like to talk to you about the difference between equality and equity. Equality comes down to access to distribution of resources evenly distributed across individuals. When you compare that to equity, it is the access to the distribution of resources according to need. When we start talking about equity versus equality, referring to the poem on the opening slide, where diversity and inclusion and justice and equity are asking their questions, if any of those things are actually occurring, is an individual truly feeling welcomed in the environment in which they are a part of? And as an intersection of equity, do they have access to the resources needed to feel a sense of belonging and supported? Then we talk about justice, referring back to the poem. Whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority? Whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining the environment that occurs? When confronting these issues, I always ask myself, does a group of people or an individual feel like they're a part? Or have we created an environment in where they feel like they do not belong? Inclusion quite simply means, does someone feel like they are part of a team, an organization, a group, despite their differences? It has to do with how they're brought into the organization, how they were invited to be a part of a team, to be a part of a group. And after they were invited, how they were treated and supported. Now, we've all experienced how it feels to be excluded from a group at some point in our lives. Well, thinking back to high school, I was a geek. Truth be told, I'm still a geek. I love participating in the not-so-cool clubs. I also felt a disassociation of not being included with the popular kids. Sometimes that feeling of exclusion can be a driver for accepting and thriving as your authentic self. Or it can cause emotional harm and cause self-doubt. Whatever the trajectory, it begins with a feeling that doesn't feel good. I've also experienced integration. I'm old enough to remember being bused into a predominantly white high school. That was definitely an experience of integration for me at that age. Feeling a sense of community only with those who were bused in, and feeling isolation from the broader school community. Having an unwritten rule with your friends not to venture too far out from the school into the community, not even to go down to the corner store. You may receive threatening looks or racial slurs. Integration is also not a good feeling from my perspective, but I understand it is a necessary step on the road to inclusion. Now, when I've experienced inclusion, I feel like I belong. I remember having a casual conversation with our CEO and sharing with him that I really feel at home in the organization. As soon as those words came out of my mouth, I thought to myself, really, Art, that was a little too much. Why would you say something like that? But it was at that moment that I realized it was because I had been treated as I belonged from day one and welcomed. And I received that consistently over the years from everyone in the organization. My voice is heard. I am seen and respected as my authentic self, which fuels how I contribute to the organization with my thoughts, with my ideas, and my perspectives. And I've also heard from colleagues and staff from groups that you would call minority groups, marginalized groups, who also feel that sense of home. I really like this model of belonging because it truly illustrates the foundation, the tenets of a foundation of having a culture that demonstrates belonging. We live in a time where you can turn on the TV. Every day, there's marginalized groups that are being attacked, threatened, killed. Think about the trauma that those who sit in those marginalized groups are carrying with them when they turn on the TV or they read a news article. It's important that when they walk into the work environment, that they trust that that work environment is a safe place, that the people who make up the culture in that work environment has a curiosity to maybe ask, are you okay? Is everything okay? Empathy. Empathy is about care and compassion. We may not be able to walk in someone's shoes, but we can surely be able to relate how it feels to be excluded. There's something that we can relate to that. And for leaders, empathy is a truly powerful tool as a leader to create a culture around psychological safety, where individuals feel supported. Acceptance. Are individuals accepted as being their authentic self? Because I would argue that someone showing up as their authentic self is diversity, and that does fuel innovation. That does drive the business. Connection. Connection is humanity to me. We all may find things that we have in common. There's common ground between us, which is a point of connection. But it also takes brave individuals to also find that connection in what's different within us. And when these tenets are put in place, individuals feel embraced by the organization. They feel valued, they feel respected, and they feel appreciated for what they're bringing to the organization by being their authentic self. The concept from my perspective is when you invite someone in and they feel like they are a part, and they feel that they can come in and feel at home and comfortable in being their authentic self. When I think about the concept of welcoming and belonging, it helps us move into inclusion very quickly and very swiftly. This is, in my perspective, an evolution and a different concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are now in a place that welcoming and belonging transcends those concepts to ensure that when people walk through the door, they feel a part of an organization and they feel as if they are at home. We may be different from our backgrounds and our beliefs and our perspectives, but that is our greatest strength. We are all part of the same race, the human race. And all the work that you do as leaders to champion the work of belonging within your organizations plays a huge role in the type of society we will have years from now. Keep up the great work, and thank you for allowing me to share these words with you today.